You think this is funny? The old janitor's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The laughter that had echoed through the executive hallway only seconds earlier died almost instantly. Every assistant, manager, and security guard turned toward the sound. The CEO, Richard Lawson, still wore the smug smile that had made half the room laugh with him. Richard pointed toward the mop bucket sitting beside the polished marble floor. "You missed a spot," he said with a grin. "Maybe cleaning isn't as easy as you thought." More laughter followed. The old man looked down at the water dripping from the mop. His uniform was faded. The knees of his work pants had been patched twice. His gray hair peeked out beneath a worn blue cap. And the name stitched above his pocket, simply, "Read Walter." He nodded once. "I'll take care of it," Richard chuckled. "That's what I like about people who know their place." No one noticed the expression on Walter's face. No anger, no embarrassment, just disappointment. He quietly pushed the mop forward and continued working as if nothing had happened. But one person in the hallway couldn't laugh. Emily Carter, the newest financial analyst at Lawson Global Industries. She had joined the company only 3 weeks earlier, but something about Walter had always stood out to her. Every morning, he greeted employees by name. Every evening, he stayed long after everyone had gone home. He fixed broken chairs without being asked. He helped interns find lost offices. He even left handwritten birthday notes on the desks of workers nobody else seemed to remember. People smiled when they saw him, but they rarely looked at him. Today was different. Emily watched as Walter slowly picked up the CEO's empty coffee cup from the conference table. Richard hadn't even bothered throwing it away. Instead, he had tossed it onto the table and expected someone else to deal with it. Walter simply carried it to the trash. No complaint, no sigh, nothing. Emily finally walked over. "I'm sorry about what happened." Walter smiled gently. "Don't be, but he humiliated you." "He only embarrassed himself." Emily frowned. "I don't understand." Walter looked toward the enormous glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago. "The funny thing about respect," he said quietly, "is that you never realize its value until you're standing in a room where nobody wants to give it to you." Before Emily could answer, Walter's old flip phone vibrated inside his pocket. He glanced at the screen. His calm expression changed. For the first time all morning, fear, not excitement, recognition. He answered immediately. "Yes, I'm on my way." The call lasted less than 15 seconds. Walter slipped the phone back into his pocket, set the mop against the wall, and looked at Emily. "Looks like today's going to be a little different than I expected." Emily smiled politely. "You finally getting a day off?" Walter laughed softly. "I haven't had one in years." He tipped his cap, picked up the cleaning cart, and disappeared around the corner. Emily watched him leave, unable to shake the strange feeling that the old janitor knew something everyone else didn't. Behind another glass wall, Richard Lawson was preparing for the biggest board meeting of the year. Investors had flown in from across the country. A multi-billion-dollar merger was waiting for approval. If today's vote succeeded, Richard would become one of the youngest CEOs ever to lead the company into the Fortune 100. He loved reminding everyone of that. Standing in front of a mirror inside his office, he adjusted his expensive Italian tie and admired his reflection. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, the board members have started to arrive." Richard smiled. "Good. By this afternoon, they'll all know they backed the right leader." She hesitated. "There's one more thing." "What?" "The chairman personally requested that every executive be inside the boardroom exactly at 10. Richard laughed. "The chairman hasn't attended a meeting in almost 5 years." "I'll believe it when I see it." His assistant didn't answer, because she knew something Richard didn't. The chairman had already arrived, and he wasn't alone. At exactly 9:47 a.m., a black sedan rolled quietly into the underground parking garage. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters, no welcoming committee, just a single driver who stepped out, opened the rear door, and waited. An elderly man in a dark navy suit emerged. His posture was straight despite his age. his silver hair was neatly combed, and the watch on his wrist looked older than most of the executives working in the building. The security guards immediately stood taller. "Good morning, sir," he acknowledged them with a small nod. "Has everyone arrived?" "Almost everyone, sir." "Good." He walked toward a private elevator that hadn't been used in months. As the doors closed, one of the younger guards whispered, "Who is he?" The older guard answered, without taking his eyes off the elevator, "Someone powerful enough that even the CEO stands when he enters. Upstairs." Richard Lawson had no idea. The building's atmosphere had already changed. He was busy rehearsing another speech about profits, expansion, and leadership. His confidence filled the room. So after today's vote, he told the executives, "We move forward exactly as planned. The merger goes through, costs are reduced, and unnecessary positions are eliminated." One vice president cleared his throat. "There may be concerns about layoffs," Richard shrugged. "People are numbers. Good leaders understand that." Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one challenged him. No one ever did. Richard mistook their silence for agreement. Across the hall, Walter quietly entered a small maintenance room. He removed his worn gloves and carefully washed his hands. Then, instead of reaching for another cleaning supply, he unlocked an old metal locker hidden in the corner. Inside hung something no one would have expected, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Next to it rested a polished pair of leather shoes, a silk tie, and a small wooden box. Walter opened the box. Inside was an old photograph. 3 smiling men stood in front of the company's very first headquarters. Nearly 40 years earlier, one of them was much younger, but unmistakably Walter. He gently brushed a thumb across the faded picture. "So much has changed," he whispered. A soft knock came at the door. It was the same driver from downstairs. "They're ready for you, sir." Walter looked at the cleaning uniform hanging from his shoulders. "For 32 years, he said quietly, almost to himself, "this uniform reminded me who the company truly belonged to." He carefully folded it instead of tossing it aside. Then he put on the suit. Within minutes, the tired old janitor had disappeared. Standing before the mirror was a man whose presence carried quiet authority, not because of expensive clothes, because of the confidence earned over a lifetime. Meanwhile, Emily was reviewing financial reports outside the boardroom when she noticed something strange. Board members who normally joked with each other had become unusually serious. Several stood as soon as the private elevator opened. Others straightened their jackets. One elderly director even smiled with genuine respect. Emily turned toward the elevator. She couldn't see who had stepped out, only the reactions. Then she heard a familiar voice. "Good morning, everyone." Her eyes widened. It couldn't be. The voice belonged to Walter, but he no longer sounded like a janitor speaking politely in the hallway. He sounded like someone the most powerful people in the company had waited years to hear. Emily froze. Her heart raced. Inside the boardroom, Richard was still smiling confidently, completely unaware that the next person to walk through the door was about to change everything. Richard opened his mouth, but for the first time in his career, no words came out. The confidence that had carried him through every meeting, every interview, and every public speech suddenly vanished. He looked around the table, hoping someone would laugh and reveal that this was an elaborate joke. No one did. Walter calmly took a seat near the chairman, not at the end of the table, but beside the people who had built the company's legacy. Richard finally found his voice. If this is true, why would someone with that kind of ownership spend decades pushing a mop through these hallways? Walter folded his hands. Because titles reveal authority, character reveals truth. The room remained silent. I wanted to know what this company looked like when no one believed the owner was watching. Richard forced a smile. So this was some kind of test? No, Walter answered. It became one after I realized how many people had forgotten why this company existed. The chairman pressed a button on the conference table. A large screen came to life. Our first agenda item is no longer the merger, he announced. It is the leadership review of Richard Lawson. Richard frowned. Leadership review? That wasn't on today's schedule. It is now. The corporate secretary placed several thick folders in front of every director. Each carried the same title: Internal Culture Review Confidential. Richard reached for one before he could open it. Helen Brooke spoke. You won't find your presentation inside. You'll find 32 years of observations. Richard looked at Walter. You've been spying on employees? Walter shook his head. I never had to spy. People tell the truth when they believe the person cleaning the floor doesn't matter. Several directors slowly nodded. Walter continued. I heard managers insulting workers after meetings. I watched promotions given to friends instead of the most qualified employees. I watched loyal staff retire without receiving so much as a thank you. And this morning, he looked directly at Richard. I watched the CEO teach hundreds of employees that respect depends on someone's job title. Richard straightened his jacket. One joke doesn't erase years of success. Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. I agree. That's why today isn't about one joke. He removed a stack of handwritten letters. The paper showed signs of age. Some letters were only months old. Others had been written years earlier. They're from employees, Walter said. Some still work here. Some resigned. Some have already passed away. Richard stared at the pile. What does that prove? Walter picked up the first letter. A warehouse worker whose wife was diagnosed with cancer. He requested flexible hours. The request was denied. Walter placed the letter on the table. The employee quit 2 weeks later. He picked up another. A single mother working in customer service. She proposed an idea that saved the company nearly $2 million. The credit was given to her department head. Another letter. A maintenance technician injured while repairing equipment. He waited 6 months for compensation while executives approved bonuses for themselves. The room grew heavier with every story. Richard tried to interrupt. Every large company has complaints. Walter nodded. You're right. But not every company ignores them. Emily looked around the room. Some directors had stopped reading. They were simply watching Walter, not because of his authority, but because every word carried the weight of someone who had witnessed decades of quiet pain. Walter reached into the final folder. This one, he said softly, matters most. He unfolded a short, handwritten note. There isn't much written here. Richard crossed his arms impatiently. Then why bring it? Walter looked at him with quiet sadness. Because sometimes the shortest message tells the biggest story. He began to read. To whoever still cares. I gave this company 28 years of my life. Today I retired. No one noticed I was leaving except the janitor. He shook my hand and thanked me for building something that mattered. That was the only goodbye I received. Walter lowered the paper. I still remember his tears. No one in the room spoke. Even Richard couldn't look away. For the first time, success no longer sounded impressive. It sounded empty. The silence lingered long after Walter folded the letter. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from confusion. It came from guilt. Richard looked around the room, searching for anyone to defend him. No one did. Finally, he cleared his throat. You're trying to make this personal. Walter met his eyes. It has always been personal. A company isn't made of glass buildings or quarterly reports. It's made of people. And every decision you make reaches someone's kitchen table. Richard leaned back in his chair. We've posted record profits for 3 straight years. Walter nodded. You have. But tell me something. When was the last time you walked through the warehouse without cameras following you? Richard didn't answer. When was the last time you had lunch with the people loading trucks in the middle of winter? Silence. When was the last time you remembered the name of the woman who cleaned your office every night? Richard looked away. Walter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Profits can buy buildings. They can't buy loyalty. The chairman stood. I'd like our human resources director to speak. A woman named Diane Foster slowly rose from her seat. Her hands trembled slightly. I've worked here for 18 years. She looked toward Richard. There are things I should have said much sooner. Richard frowned. Diane. She interrupted him. No, you've interrupted enough people. The room grew even quieter. 3 years ago, I warned you that employee morale was collapsing. You told me unhappy workers could simply be replaced." She swallowed. "Last year, I recommended expanding our scholarship program for employees' children. You called it a waste of money. And 6 months ago, I asked you to personally attend the retirement ceremony for 24 employees. You sent flowers instead." Richard's face hardened. "I made business decisions." "No," Diane replied. "You made convenient decisions." Walter quietly watched. He wasn't enjoying this. Emily noticed that. There was no satisfaction on his face. Only sadness, as if he had hoped this day would never become necessary. The chairman turned another page. "There is one final report." Richard forced a laugh. "What now?" The chairman looked directly at him. "The merger." Richard's confidence returned for a brief moment. "Exactly. That's what we've been trying to discuss." The chairman slowly closed the file. "The merger has been suspended." Richard blinked. "What?" "Pending today's leadership review." "That's impossible. The investors already agreed." "They did. But they included one condition." Richard frowned. "What condition?" The chairman slid a sealed envelope across the table. "It was delivered this morning." Richard opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single page bearing the signatures of every major investment partner. His eyes moved across the first paragraph. Then the second. The color drained from his face. Emily couldn't see the letter, but she could see Richard's hands trembling. Walter spoke softly. "Would you like me to read it?" Richard said nothing. The chairman nodded. Walter unfolded the letter. "To the board of Lawson Global Industries. Our investment has always been based on the company's reputation for integrity. If today's leadership review confirms a culture of arrogance, disrespect, or ethical failure at the executive level, we will immediately withdraw from the merger." The room became completely still. Walter continued. "We invest in people before we invest in profits." He placed the letter back on the table. "That," he said quietly, "is something your brother understood." Richard looked up sharply. "Brother?" Walter's expression softened. "I wasn't talking about your father. I was talking about Michael." Richard froze. No one outside the family knew that name. Michael Lawson, his younger brother, the brother who had walked away from the company years earlier after a bitter argument with Richard. Walter looked at him with deep disappointment. "The saddest part isn't that he left, it's why he left." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. For the first time that morning, Richard looked afraid, not of losing his position, but of a truth he had spent years trying to bury. Richard stared at Walter as though the air had been pulled from his lungs. "You don't know what you're talking about." Walter held his gaze. "I know more than you think." Richard slammed both hands onto the table. "My brother abandoned this family." "No," Walter replied quietly. "He walked away because he refused to become the man you were becoming." The word struck harder than any accusation. Richard's jaw tightened. "Michael was weak." Walter slowly shook his head. "Michael believed leadership was earned. You believed it was inherited." The chairman opened another folder. 5 years ago, Michael Lawson submitted a proposal to create an employee ownership program. Emily looked up. She had never heard of it. Walter continued. "The plan would have allowed thousands of employees to receive shares in the company after years of service." Richard laughed bitterly. "It would have cost millions." Walter answered without hesitation. "It would have created loyalty money could never buy." The chairman slid another document across the table. Richard recognized it immediately. His own signature covered the bottom. His face turned pale. I remember this." Walter nodded. "You rejected the proposal. But that's not what broke your brother's heart." Richard's breathing became heavier. Walter looked directly into his eyes. "You took credit for his work." The room fell silent once again. Emily watched Richard's confidence crumble piece by piece. "It wasn't like that," Richard whispered. Walter didn't argue. Instead, he pressed a small remote. The large screen behind him lit up. A recorded video began to play. The date in the corner read, 6 years earlier. A younger Michael Lawson appeared on the screen during a leadership conference. "I don't care if my name is remembered," Michael said. "I only want this company to remain a place where people are treated with dignity." The audience applauded. Then another clip appeared. Richard stood on the same stage weeks later. He presented the exact same vision, using nearly the same words. Without mentioning Michael even once, gasps echoed around the room. Richard lowered his head. "I was trying to protect the company." "No," Walter said softly. "You were protecting your pride." Helen Brooks closed her eyes. "I remember that conference." "So do I," another director admitted. "I thought those ideas sounded familiar." Walter switched off the screen. "The tragedy isn't that Richard wanted success. The tragedy is that he believed success required someone else's sacrifice." For the first time, Richard looked genuinely ashamed. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "I worked every day. I gave this company everything." Walter nodded. "I know you worked hard. But tell me something. When your father was dying, what was the last thing he asked you?" Richard froze. No one in the room moved. Walter repeated the question. "What was the last promise you made him?" Richard's eyes slowly filled with tears. His voice barely escaped his lips. He told me." Walter waited patiently. "He told me to take care of the people." The words broke apart. "Before the prophets." Walter closed his eyes. "I was there." Richard looked up in disbelief. "You were?" Walter nodded. "He asked me to stay, not as an owner, not as a director, but as someone who would never stop watching." The room finally understood. Walter had never been hiding. He had been honoring a promise. 32 years of cleaning floors. Not because he had to, because someone had to protect the soul of the company. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Everything suddenly made sense. Every kind word, every handwritten birthday card, every quiet act of compassion. Walter wasn't pretending to be a good man. He simply was one. Richard slowly stood. His voice cracked. "I thought if I became successful, my father would finally be proud of me." Walter's expression softened. He already was. Richard looked confused. Walter reached into his jacket one final time. He removed an old envelope, its edges worn with age. "I've carried this for 12 years. Richard stared at his father's handwriting on the front. It simply read, "For Richard." When he's finally ready to hear the truth, Walter gently placed the envelope in front of him. No one spoke. Richard's shaking hand slowly opened it. And as his eyes reached the first line, his entire world changed forever. Richard's hands trembled so violently that he almost dropped the envelope. For a long moment, he couldn't bring himself to unfold the letter. The handwriting alone was enough to take him back 12 years to the hospital room where his father had taken his final breath. The room was silent. No one rushed him. Walter simply waited. Finally, Richard opened the letter. The first line stole the air from his lungs. "My son, if you're reading this, it means Walter believes you're finally ready to hear what I couldn't tell you before I died." Richard blinked away tears and continued. "I know you've spent your life trying to prove you deserve this company, but you've been chasing the wrong prize. The greatest leader isn't remembered because he became the richest man in the room. He's remembered because people felt safe when he walked into it." Richard's vision blurred. He remembered being a young boy, following his father through the factory. His father had known every employee by name. He had celebrated birthdays. He had attended funerals. He had quietly paid medical bills for workers who couldn't afford them. Back then, Richard hadn't understood why. He understood now. The letter continued, "If one day you become CEO, promise me you'll never confuse fear with respect. People may obey a powerful leader, but they'll only follow a compassionate one." Richard lowered the letter. His shoulders shook. "I failed him." Walter stood and slowly walked toward him. "You failed yourself. But failure isn't the end. It becomes the end only when pride refuses to learn." Richard looked around the room. For the first time, he wasn't looking at executives. He was looking at people. People he had ignored. People he had underestimated. People whose lives had been shaped by his decisions. He slowly removed the CEO badge from his jacket and placed it on the conference table. "I don't deserve this chair today." The directors watched without speaking. Richard turned toward the board. "I submit my resignation as Chief Executive Officer. Effective immediately." Gasps echoed across the room. The chairman folded his hands. "Richard, are you resigning because you're defeated?" Richard wiped away a No, resigning because I finally understand what this position actually means. He turned to Walter. I spent years trying to become the most powerful man in this building, but the man everyone respected most, he smiled sadly, was carrying a mop. Walter's eyes filled with tears, not because Richard had resigned, because, for the first time, he heard sincerity. Emily couldn't hold back her emotions. She had witnessed the entire transformation. The arrogant CEO who had mocked a janitor that morning was no longer standing in front of them. A humbled son was. The chairman stood. The board has reached its decision. Every eye turned toward him. Richard Lawson's resignation. He paused. Is rejected. Richard looked up in disbelief. What? You don't need punishment. You need responsibility. The chairman continued. Beginning today, you will remain with this company, but not as CEO. You will spend the next 12 months working in every department: the warehouse, customer service, maintenance, shipping, night cleaning. You will learn every job performed by every person whose work you've taken for granted. Richard nodded before the chairman even finished speaking. I accept. Walter smiled. Good. Because leadership begins where pride ends. 6 months later, the company looked different. Executives ate lunch with warehouse workers. Employee scholarships doubled. Retirement ceremonies became company-wide events. The employee ownership program Michael had once dreamed of was finally approved. Thousands of workers became shareholders. Productivity reached record highs, not because people were afraid to lose their jobs, but because they finally felt they belonged. Richard was often seen wearing a simple maintenance uniform, helping repair equipment or cleaning break rooms after his shift. Some employees didn't recognize him at first. Those who did were surprised by something even greater. He never asked anyone to forgive him. He simply worked. One rainy evening, Emily found Walter standing in the lobby, looking out at the city skyline. You could have taken the CEO's office years ago, she said. Walter smiled. I never wanted the corner office. I wanted the people inside it to deserve it. Emily laughed softly. I think your brother would be proud. Walter looked toward the old company sign glowing outside. I hope so. A year later, the board voted unanimously. Richard Lawson returned as CEO. This time, there were no grand speeches, no cameras, no celebration. Instead, before entering his office, he walked into the maintenance room. He picked up a mop. He cleaned the same marble floor where he had once laughed at Walter. When he finished, he placed the mop back exactly where he had found it. Walter, now serving as honorary chairman, smiled quietly. You missed a spot. Richard looked down. Then both men laughed. Not at each other. Together. Because respect had finally replaced pride. And in that moment, everyone in the building understood a truth they would never forget. The strongest leaders are never the ones who demand respect. They're the ones who earn it every single day. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were Richard? And if you believe respect should never depend on someone's job title, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Subscribe to Legacy Whisper for more powerful stories where kindness, truth, and justice always find their way home.